but I do want to mention, I want to start out now on that front. I just looked at your block list this morning as I refresh. So for those that don't know Peter's been maintaining a very valuable block list for 27 years, and at the moment it has 3,495 domain names as of this morning. And he gets a lot of love and he gets a lot of hate. So you're looking at a guy here who's got pretty thick skin, and yet you can see just by the kind of character he is. Actually, the way it works out for people to actually see who Peter is probably a good thing, because I'm not the first one to let the world know, here's a guy who did good things. But those good things for people upset a lot of people. I don't want to focus on the upsetness a lot today, but rather on, I'm wondering if you have a bit of a story to tell on how this whole thing started. Like 27 years ago, what were you doing that made you feel like you had to start a block list?
Well, I was 28 actually, I should say. 1997.
Changed. That's right. Well, we have another calendar year change.
1997. So is when I first kind of put my list on the internet. And I was just like, I think I was 17 or something like that at the time. And lots of things happened. I was learning about the internet. And I feel actually roughly about that point is how I feel about AI now, in that I think that AI is about roughly around the same point in its sort of maturity, in that it's this big thing that has exploded and it's going to change human life on Earth. And it still has a long way to go. But at the time, the internet was that thing. And in those few years, I just remember just learning so much and being fascinated and fell in love with the internet completely. Anyway, so I'd learned about DNS and running name servers and how that all worked. And I realized that I'd set up my own local DNS server and configured it to be, registered my first domain, which, by the way, I've lost completely. I made the rookie mistake of, because, you needed two name servers to assign it to. And I was desperate to get this domain, and I didn't have a second name server. So I assigned another IP address to the same name server and used the same one name server to be authoritative for the domain. And then I lost access to that name server. So I could not get it back. And Internet, I think at the time, just wouldn't let me do anything. And so and stupidly, I used the admin at or hostmaster at that domain. So I couldn't even, I lost access to the MX records, everything. And there was no way to prove that I owned it. Anyway, never make that mistake again. I was 17, so I think it's forgivable. Anyway,
is that a domain name that you want to share? What was that?
Or is that called never.org. And I had a few little pages up on there, and it was kind of a cool domain. I tried to get access to it from the Internet Archive, but then someone bought it and they put up a robots text which said that agent star disallow everything. So it got wiped from the Internet Archive. Sadly. Man. Yeah, anyway. But yes, I'd run my own name server, and I understood about how authoritative domains and wildcards and all sorts. And I realized that if I set my local name server, which I was using for resolutions, as the master for like DoubleClick.net,
right,
then I could, any request from my machine to DoubleClick.net would be effectively dev nulled. So yeah, and I thought I was very clever, and I thought that was great. And so every time I was on a web page, then I saw some ads, I would look up where the ads were being hosted, and I would add that zone as my to the configuration of my local bind, and then eventually I'd put it up on the internet. I thought, well, maybe some other people would use this, and yeah, that's the story. There was about 200 or so domains on it at the time, and it was good. And then I found other people doing the same thing, and host list was the most common trick, which was the same thing. And I felt also very clever because my method, you don't have to maintain a hosts file of individual subdomains. Yeah. So that's the story.
You just point any other device to the same DNS server, they immediately get the same benefit.
Yeah.
And how did you choose to respond? What was the DNS answer at the time? Did you do a 127.0.0.1 or NXDOMAIN or?
Yeah, so over time, I've tried all sorts of different things. You can do NX domains, you can do zero, like an
Yes.
invalid IPs, you could do localhost, you can have like a central server, which I at one point set up a machine to be able to see the visibility for what your machine is trying to do, what your browser is trying to
Right.
do, what other devices are
Right.
trying to do is really interesting. And the different log files you get out of it. So you can look at your name server resolution log, like what's it failing at. You can do a web proxy and actually look at the inspector traffic that's going through. So I've tried all sorts of different things. There was some different issues at the time. Like I remember trying 0.0.0.0 and the Windows TCP stack didn't like that, and it would hang for a long time.
Oh,
I think it's not the case
that
anymore.
obviously must be solved by now because
Yeah,
that is Cloudflare's default is zero
yeah,
zero zero zero, because this was obviously started before the standardization of EDE, the extended DNS errors,
yeah,
which we're in the middle of. Like we have deployed EDE on
yeah.
our software. Quad 9 is in the process of rolling it out, but Cloudflare doesn't do it. OpenDNS doesn't do it the last time I checked. And so
Yeah.
we're in the middle of this. It's amazing. 27 years later, the actual method of blocking is still not finally standardized where everybody does the same thing.
No.
So from our point of view, it's just like, okay, but it's so important to gather that telemetry
Yeah.
because it's nice to be able to have this kind of protection of having a block list and not resolving a domain name. But at some point, someone's going to say, well, what have we actually been blocking? Or someone who's offering it as a service needs to be able to, show how often it's been done. And so it's pretty interesting that
Yeah.
after all these years, we're still working on it.
It's one of the frustrating things about DNS is that because it's one of those things that kind of just works in the background, it doesn't have a high
Yes.
visibility. And because it's sort of almost difficult to justify the expense of deploying new but useful technologies or
Right.
additions or extensions to it, that often it just kind of gets left behind. And
Yes.
it's things like ED are would be amazingly useful to the tech community behind it, but
Yes.
is it worth the money? So it's hard to convince people to spend money on it. It's hard to go as a network admin to go to his boss or their boss, our boss, sorry, and say, "Hey, can we spend a couple of months deploying this and testing it, and it'd be really useful." And they'll say, "Well, what's the ROI?" And it's zero because
Right.
And
Right.
it's frustrating. I think there's a few things like that.